Hello, everyone, and welcome to week 3 of Sports Speak, our 5th episode. I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
Exciting day. There wasn't much that happened this weekend in sports until late on Sunday when some big surprises came in the NFL. Two things for the Patriots that ironically came at the same time, and I think it was planned that they came at the same time. First, we saw a penalty come for the weird incident last year when it was discovered that they were at the Cincinnati Bengals game and were filming the Bengals sideline. A $1.1 million fine for the team. They can't send TV crews to film games next year, other games that are going on. And they lost a third-round pick in 2021. And then, just minutes later, it was announced that Cam Newton was finally off the free agent market. He would be replacing Tom Brady coming up this September here as the quarterback of the New England Patriots. And the first thing I just want to say, Tim, is I think this was a lot of strategy from the higher-ups of the New England Patriots. They knew this ruling was coming down, and this did two things. First of all, it helped distract from yet another penalty that this franchise has faced in these past 20 years when you think about Deflategate, Spygate, all the different things that have happened in the past. And then the second thing that I saw online, which was very interesting, is they only signed Newton for a one-year deal. So if he leaves in the free agency, they will get a compensation third-round pick, which will undo that whole penalty that they got in the first place. So, I think this was very strategic, but it's going to be interesting to see how Newton fits into that Patriots dynamic.
Now, it's funny, Eddie, because based on what I was reading, I thought it went the opposite direction. I thought they signed Newton first, and then the NFL addressed the penalty. But, regardless of whatever order it went down, it's a smart move by Bill Belichick. When you think about it, a compensatory pick is pretty much huge. And obviously, it kind of shows that, hey, he may not necessarily have a future idea with Cam Newton after this year, but it's a great move. Everything with COVID right now, a lot of players aren't getting paid their value. $7.5 million, as a base salary, let's say, for Cam Newton as a starting QB is really good. Think about this, Eddie. 3 years ago, when Josh McCown signed a one-year extension with the Jets, he made $15 million to be a backup QB. Same thing as well with Teddy Bridgewater. So now $7.5 million is necessarily a steal for a quarterback, but you also look at it as well is that, with incentives or whatever, okay, he may make a little bit more, but it kind of scares me about the Patriots because this is a team where no one really knew Jarrett Stidham. Everyone thought, all right, well, I guess we'll see what he does. But now that they have Cam Newton, if he's healthy and his arm is put together, this is going to be a very, very scary team. They have some wide receivers that may not be, Mike Evans or Chris Goodwin or Godwin on the Buccaneers, in which Tom Brady left for. But, some young receivers that are developing and getting better are perfect for Cam Newton because you have to remember, with the exception of Kelvin Benjamin, really, Cam Newton's never had a good target, and obviously Greg Olsen as well, to throw to throughout his career.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because one of the things that people are very, concerned about with this whole situation is how will Bill Belichick adapt? The last 2 decades, he's had a quarterback that was not mobile, who was more for the efficient routes, short routes. You've got Cam Newton who can throw farther passes than Tom Brady and also is a mobile quarterback. But I just want to say to any of those people who are worried about Bill Belichick adjusting to this system, he's adjusted many times because the Patriots have been able to use the same offensive system for 20 years when the NFL has been constantly changing. The NFL of 2020 is so different from the NFL in 2000. And the Patriots are the one common denominator, still able to win 11 to 13 games a year with Tom Brady at quarterback with a very similar offense that they had in the first place. So I don't think this is going to be that tough of a challenge for Belichick. He's just going to have to adjust things. And you mentioned you've got some young guys. You've got Julian Edelman out of the slot. They do have a couple of holes. The offensive line isn't great, but remember, Newton is still mobile. I know he's 31 years old, but he's still got a lot of action in the backfield. Patriots have a solid running game. They might need to find a tight end, kind of address that because he did have Greg Olsen all those years. But nonetheless, I don't think this is going to be a problem where Newton doesn't fit with the Patriots system. How about you? What do you think about that?
Well, I think Newton's going to fit with the Patriot system, but, it's funny. You mentioned that this isn't really going to be hard on Bill Belichick. I think the hardest part is going to be Cam Newton learning Bill Belichick's system, because you have to remember this. Cam Newton, when he was with Carolina, he was more known really for his incredible running ability along with his incredible throwing power, obviously, when you go back to that MVP year. Well, in Bill Belichick's system, especially with having Tom Brady there for the past 15 plus years, Tom didn't run. So it's going to be a lot of short passing, a lot of, getting into the rhythm. And Bill has to kind of adapt as well. That Cam Newton, despite all of these injuries, still kind of does have some speed and legs. So I'm sure he's going to have some plays for him for that. But it's going to be a lot more short passing. Cam's not going to have to rely on his power arm. And to be honest, Cam in his career has had a lack of deep accuracy. We can't ignore that. He has a strong arm, but he is not consistent throwing the deep ball. So I think Bill Belichick will play that to his advantage because, to be honest, Tom Brady may not have the arm strength that Cam Newton does, but Tom Brady was kind of the same way. And he made it into a system where Tom only had to make precise throws on precise plays when it mattered. And I really do think he can get this work for Cam Newton. And I wouldn't be surprised if Cam Newton instantly pops up as an MVP favorite as well.
Yeah, former MVP back in 2015. And two more quick things I want to get in on this. First off, I kind of want to make a cross-sport connection to Kawhi Leonard in the NBA, because if you really think about it, I know Cam Newton, he was kind of on the downslide, I know, these last couple years with the Panthers, but he barely played last year, only appeared in, 2 regular season games at the beginning of the year and dealt with injuries. But, I'm thinking about Kawhi Leonard when he was with the Spurs and was injured his last year, and then found a new home on a 1-year deal in Toronto and found all kinds of success in a different type of system. And I think Cam Newton could sort of do the same thing. The one concern that I have, I was watching The Herd this morning, and Colin Cowherd's got some crazy opinions on some things, but I did agree with him on one thing that he said we at least have to watch for, not guaranteeing it's going to happen. But the Patriots kind of, in some ways, you could compare them to the Cleveland Browns because they've got a lot of young guys. Now you've got a very, expressive quarterback that says what he wants. Tom Brady was very quiet and fit in really perfectly with Bill Belichick because we know how notorious Belichick is for not using words very much. Cam Newton is very outspoken, very similar to Baker Mayfield in that way. And now you've got a lot of clashing personalities there. You've got Julian Edelman. You've got a lot of young, inexperienced guys. There's not a lot of veteran leaders on this team. And, we still got Robert Kraft. You got Bill Belichick. I think it's going to be interesting to see how these guys mesh together. I think it could be a little bit of a slow start these first couple games, but I think the Patriots could be solid this year with Cam Newton. I don't know if I'd go as far as saying MVP candidate, but I think he could be very solid, and I think they definitely have a chance to win the AFC East. And I just want to say, and we can talk about this as well, how about this AFC East coming up this year? We've got the Buffalo Bills, who are still going to be a very good team with Josh Allen at quarterback. The Jets, if Sam Darnold stays healthy, they could have a successful year. The Dolphins now have Tua, and they secretly have a lot of really good weapons. That team was not too good last year, but they had a couple weapons that got hurt during the year that'll be back. And plus, we don't know how Tua is going to do at the NFL level. And then you've got New England still returning a bunch of players, and now with Cam Newton at quarterback. This AFC East is going to be really exciting to watch this year.
Well, my first question is, to my understanding, if Tua, gets back, because we know he's going to make the roster no matter what, but to my understanding, he may actually miss some of the regular season due to his previous injury. If I heard right.
I think
So the way I look at that is he's going to probably be doing a backup role throughout most of the first year, because if you're going to throw a quarterback in, unless they're doing really terrible to the point where it's almost like Cleveland Browns status, a few years back, 0-16 season, I don't see them, jumping to him right away. But you look and, it's funny, Eddie, you mentioned that AFC East. Everyone thought this is going to be the year for the Jets or the Bills. I don't think it is anymore. Cam Newton, again, the one thing that's going to tell it all, Eddie, if Cam Newton's completion percentage goes up this year, the system's working for him, and they're going to win games. So that I think is going to be the tall tale. But Sam Darnold has to stay healthy. That's the only chance the Jets have. The Bills, you acquired Stefon Diggs, but let's not forget to mention the last time you traded for a very good receiver, you failed to utilize them properly. So I'm very eager to see how they approach this. Josh Allen, he has arguably the best arm anyone's seen in a very long time. But he needs to stop turning over the football. That's all he does. And people complain about Daniel Jones. Josh Allen seems like he turns over the football twice a game. And then you flip it. Again, I mentioned Sam Darnold being healthy. Well, seeing ghosts is not going to happen if you're a Jets fan. And quite frankly, I still don't have faith in Adam Gase. I think he's the worst coach I've ever seen. And that's up there with Ben McAdoo and also the new Giants offensive line coordinator of, oh my goodness, who was the Browns coach last year?
Freddie Kitchens.
Thank you, Freddie Kitchens. Probably two of the worst coaches I've ever seen. And now you add up there with Adam Gase. I mean, it's up there. Don't get me wrong. But they have to be consistent. And if they're not, the Patriots can go 7-9, and they'll probably still win the division, if I'm being honest, in terms of you got to be consistent. The Jets never are either. Well, the Bills the last few years, I will say, they've been consistent. But in terms of how things work out for the Bills, have never been consistent. And I really don't see the Dolphins. The Dolphins' defense is going to be a lot better. I don't see them winning more than 6 games, though, this year.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. And the AFC East is now kind of going to take the shape of the NFC East that we've seen over the past few years, where there's no real one breakout team that gets all like 11, 12 wins. It's going to be a fight till week 17 probably, and someone maybe with 9 wins might win the division and end up in the playoffs. But it's going to be really interesting to see how Cam Newton fits into this dynamic. And last thing on this topic I kind of wanted to ask you, Tim, is if this really works out with Cam Newton and the Patriots go far in the playoffs and find more success, I mean, we know Bill Belichick is a legendary coach in his time with Tom Brady, but how does this help his legacy if now with Cam Newton, if he can find that same type of success?
Well, I think it does help because it proves the stereotype that maybe, Tom Brady wasn't as good as what he was, and it was all Bill Belichick. I still believe, with or without Tom Brady, Bill Belichick was going to be successful. You can't convince me that you could turn around and take a terrible Browns team your first year and then make it a competitive playoff team the following year. That man has no idea what he's doing. And, all those years with the New York Giants as an assistant coach, all those years as well prior with other teams as assistant coaches, he has the background and the knowledge from arguably some of the best coaches of all time. So it doesn't surprise me that you can make the argument when this is all said and done that he is the best NFL coach of all time. But it is going to tell that story, Eddie, of that he can do it with anyone. It's just a matter of filling the pieces and plugging the holes in each system when he needs to. But I do want to ask you one question. Let's say the Patriots do go and be successful. Do you feel this is an underdog story that would go with it, considering that fact that it's not Tom Brady? Or do you feel it's going to be played off as, well, this is Bill Belichick, he's the greatest of all time, and there's no surprise that they went that far?
Well, I think it's going to be interesting how the media would cover it, because I feel like for years, Bill Belichick has kind of flown under the radar because the focus has been Brady, Tom versus time, all these things, But I think it's going to be really interesting to see how they cover it personally. I think it would be a really interesting underdog story because New England, I mean, they're not just losing Tom Brady either. Rob Gronkowski, I know he's been in and out of retirement and injuries, but he's gone now for Tampa Bay as well. I also saw their offensive line coach, who had been there since the beginning of this dynasty in the early 2000s, retired. Their defense is definitely still solid, but it's a lot of young guys. There's a lot of young players on this team, which is something they have not dealt with in many years. And you've still got a guy like Julian Edelman, who's still a very solid wide receiver. But I think it would be an underdog story. Like we talked about, I know there's no world beaters in the AFC East, but that division is going to be challenging. And if the Patriots can somehow, go 5-1 in division play this year, I think really that would be really impressive for this team given the circumstances. And I think it should be considered an underdog story if the Patriots go far. But talking about them going far, it's still going to be tough. I mean, Baltimore's such a good team. You've got two really talented squads in the AFC South in the Texans and the Titans. You've still got the Colts there, too. You don't know how Phillip Rivers is going to fare. They've still got some good guys. Then, of course, in the West, you got the defending Super Bowl champs and the Chiefs and a couple other really underrated solid teams. So AFC is going to be really challenging this year. But really, credit has been long overdue for Bill Belichick for his coaching. I know he's had some scandals, and that kind of hurts his legacy in a way, but he really deserves some credit, especially if he can take this Patriots team with a new quarterback and find a lot of success this year.
Well, I'm also going to say this. If Bill Belichick turns around and has a 16-0 season without having to film a game, then you're going to start saying, okay, maybe it wasn't the tape that helped them. But, Eddie, I do want to ask one more question because you mentioned all these teams. When you look at all these teams now, because we've gotten to see the off seasons, I mean, sure, there's a couple guys like Jadeveon Clowney that still haven't signed with the team yet. Who do you think are going to be the biggest surprise team? Because we have one every year in terms of the NFL playoffs. What team do you think is going to be the biggest surprise this year, and what team is going to be the biggest disappointment?
Biggest surprise, I'm going to go with the Denver Broncos, which might be a little surprising, obviously. But, you've got the Chargers and the Raiders in that division as well. I don't think either of them are really going to be that great this year. I know they've had some changes at quarterback. I really am excited to see Drew Lock in his first full season because, don't get me wrong, when he replaced Joe Flacco, he was pretty solid. I mean, when he first debuted in his first preseason game, he was throwing some really good throws, got the chance to play after Flacco's neck injury, and assumed that starting job. And, I mean, overall, Denver's just got a lot of talent up and down that roster. I know they've signed some other guys as well, but I think Drew Lock is going to really be strong, and they still have a solid defense. Don't forget, Von Miller's still there. I know Von Miller's up in his years now, but, I mean – I think Denver could be a surprising team on the positive side. I think a team that could be a real disappointment this year, I think it's still going to be the Cleveland Browns. I don't see how they can really mesh together. I know they're bringing in another new coach that should improve from Freddie Kitchens, but I don't know. I know Baker Mayfield can be solid, but he's still very streaky, and just all the different personalities between him and Kareem Hunt and Odell and Jarvis Landry. There's so much talent on that team, but it really doesn't mesh together well. It just doesn't have a system that's dynamic and fits, just feels very clumpy, and just it doesn't really – and their defense isn't too stellar either. They've got a couple of talents, and also you can't have Myles Garrett swinging his helmet at defenseless players either. That'll help as well. But I think overall, the Denver Broncos would be the surprise, and I'd put Cleveland as the possible disappointment. How about you?
Yeah, when I look at it, it's kind of interesting because at first I was like, Cleveland may be my disappointing team, but I'm actually not going that direction. We'll talk about that more in a moment. But my first surprising team, I would say, for this year, I'm going to go with the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, hear me out on this. I know they missed the playoffs last year. I know they were right around 500. But I'm slowly starting to believe in Gruden just a little bit, as weird as that sounds. And I guess I have to knock on wood if I'm with him. But, the one thing about this AFC West, you have to get better to go over and compete with Andy Reid's Chiefs. And from the first year with absolutely nothing and Gruden trying to sell everything in existence on that Oakland Raiders team, he turned around and gave them a solid year this year. I think Derek Carr is starting to understand the system. You have a bunch of young guys there. I mean, who would have expected Darren Waller, of all players, to turn around and be one of the top tight ends in the league? You turn around now and you start getting guys like Hunter Renfrow that's starting to understand the system better. And you start finding more guys to get their roles. I really think this Raiders team could get better, and I think their defense is even improving day by day in terms of how they approach this offseason. I mean, they didn't make big moves, but they made some moves to address some things they have. So I think this is going to be a consistent team. I'm not saying they're going to win the division because, let's be honest, no one's going to beat the Chiefs. The Chiefs are just their own entity, but this is going to be a team that's going to be, I think, the number one wildcard team and could make a very good playoff push. Now, I want to turn around and say my biggest disappointment this year, and I still think this team will win the North, but my biggest disappointment is going to be the Baltimore Ravens. I think the Ravens had a lot of hype now for the last 2 years. But there's one thing about teams that don't make many changes in terms of their system. And we've seen it. The Giants, for example, they went from Super Bowl to literally below 500 because they didn't make any changes on their team. And if anything, regressed over the past few years. I mean, you think about it in sports, if you're not making change, you're not improving. And yes, don't get me wrong, they did make some signings. They did make some big acquisitions. I'm not denying that. But you have to change your system up. That's why Bill Belichick has always been consistent. Tom Brady wasn't always check down Tom Brady his entire career. Things change through the years based upon your opponent. That doesn't change for our ball. And to be honest, with the exception of the running plays, it's almost like it's the same exact system that Joe Flacco was once in as well. So I think they're going to be the disappointment because I think teams are going to start to catch on to them. And I wouldn't be surprised if they're a 3 seed this year and they're a first-round exit in the playoffs.
Yeah, and I mean, they did not impress in the playoffs, and the Tennessee Titans are no world beaters and really exposed Lamar Jackson. And you mentioned these teams that have fallen off from the Super Bowl and like with the Giants. Don't forget about the Ravens. They won the Super Bowl back in 2012, and that team also didn't have many changes. I know they kind of lost Ray Rice after his whole scandal, but other than that, they didn't really change things up, and eventually Joe Flacco phased out. And now with Lamar Jackson, I still think they're going to be pretty good this year, but Lamar Jackson I do not think is a long-term solution because he's a mobile quarterback, but he's not going to be as fast as the years go on. Other teams are going to be able to figure him out. And you've got an AFC North that is very challenging. Cleveland is still going to be a tough team, even though I see them as my disappointment. Now you got the Bengals with Joe Burrow. I'm not saying they're going to be great, but they've got quite the talent at quarterback. And Pittsburgh's still got Big Ben and got a lot of weapons on the offense and defense. So I'm really excited to see what's going to happen with Baltimore, but I see what you were saying with them.
Well, I do want to say this. You have to remember as well, they're arguably the best guard to ever live, Marshall Yonder, retired. Mm-hmm. So you miss their best offensive lineman, period. And now you have to turn around and adapt. I mean, don't get me wrong. They did go and they did make a big sign of Derek Wolfe. That's a good address to defensive end. But after that, I mean, sure, you have, Jimmy Smith, who was already there. You had to come back and get. But their biggest free agent signing was Chris Moore, a backup wide receiver and a special teamer. That's really about it. Everyone else was, like third or whatever. They needed a special teamer. That's a team that really didn't improve. And again, that's the reason why I see them being a 3 seed. Teams that just don't make those active changes to get consistently better overall. I mean, think about it. How many different players in the Patriots dynasty have they won with? And I know you look at the offense, sure, they've always had Brady, Gronk, Jules, Amendola, but you turn around, they had other players around them. There was different offensive linemen for the most part. That defense changed on the fly. It wasn't the same players. So that's the point, is that you always have to change and adapt to new systems to be successful. And that's why Bill Belichick is so good. And I wouldn't be surprised if he's good again this year. And I'm eager to see other teams that are successful in that system as well. Even when Pittsburgh was successful for a good little bit, they changed constantly on a fly, even with having good wide receivers around. So I really think Baltimore is going to be upsetting because of that, because there hasn't been much change now over the last 3 years.
Yeah, and I want to think about also, because we talk about how history repeats itself, and well, think about with the Ravens too. After they won that Super Bowl in 2012, you mentioned they did not make a lot of changes, and they lost a lot of players that retired and left, specifically on that defense. Ray Lewis, Haloti Ngata, Ed Reed, a lot of really talented borderline Hall of Fame players that they had, and they really didn't replace them that great. Sure, they've really stocked up with young talent right now, but didn't make any adjustments from last year, and with a lot of movement. I mean, this offseason in the NFL was one of the wildest we've ever seen with the amount of moves, and not just at the quarterback position. Of course, Tom Brady and Cam are going to end up stealing the show, but so many acquisitions, so many trades. DeAndre Hopkins, David Johnson, moves on defense as well. And we still got guys who haven't signed yet, like you mentioned, Jadeveon Clowney. The Ravens have stayed complacent right now, and we'll see if that costs them. Personally, I don't think it's going to really have that much of an effect this year because with all these guys in new systems, they're going to have to adjust. But I think 2021 and beyond, and once people start to figure out Lamar Jackson a little more, I think that could actually hurt them. But that's going to wrap up we did like a full AFC preview today. We'll get into the NFC on another show. But we'll get into two other topics quickly, and I want to start with the NBA first because they've released the schedule for this upcoming season, restart rather, and it will start on July 30th. And of the 24 teams, they have chosen Zion Williamson, of course, as the opening game. The Pelicans take on the Jazz, and the Pelicans get 6 nationally televised games of their 8 regular season games, have the easiest schedule of the 24 teams. I mean, this is just prime for Zion Williamson to get some attention and for New Orleans to get into the playoffs.
Yeah, you know who I actually feel most for with the schedule change? It's the Miami Heat. I don't know if you saw this, but the Heat were projected to play 8 games against teams that aren't coming to Orlando. So now they got eliminated from that schedule. The only team left that is in Orlando that they were supposed to play originally was the Phoenix Suns. So you turn that around now. They lose a series against the Knicks. They lose series against, other struggling Eastern teams. And now you have to play the Bucks. You have to play all these other good teams. And all of a sudden now, I don't feel like the Miami Heat make the playoffs. So I really feel for them. But you mentioned the Zion thing. I mean, we kind of talked about it back in the first episode, Eddie, where it kind of feels like the NBA is kind of, mixing some things for Zion. Well, now we have it confirmed 100%. If the Pelicans don't make the playoffs, we have some issues. That's all I'm going to say. If the Pelicans at this point don't make the playoffs as an 8 seed, there's going to be issues. 6 televised games, and mind you, I would say 6 relatively easy games. I don't say their game against the Jazz is going to be easy, but everything after that, I would say is easy. And you have to remember, how hard are the Jazz going to go? They may play this like a summer game because they hadn't played the game in a good while, and their team locked in. There's a bunch of teams up there in the top locked in. So a lot of those teams, I wouldn't be surprised, play very relaxed. There's another team as well that plays in the first night, the Lakers. I'm interested to see how they handle it. Obviously, we're going to talk a little bit about what the Lakers just did, but, turning around, they may also play soft as well in regards to trying to get things, back into a rhythm in basketball. So I almost feel like, Eddie, this Orlando run in the beginning for teams that have clinched their way in is almost going to be like summer league games a little bit. Yeah, I mean, you're going to see stars play, but you're going to see them play limited minutes. But I think it helps guys like LeBron out a little bit too, who are getting up there in age.
Yeah, I think Summer League's an interesting comparison. I'm going to go more so with the preseason because, and you talk about some of these teams, especially the teams that are like 3rd, 4th, 5th in the East and West. Think about like Utah, the Rockets, Denver on the western side. On the East, you think about like Boston, Philadelphia. They know they're in the playoffs, and that's, of course, the end goal. And they're pretty locked into what position they're going to be anyway. So why rush it and risk things? But the thing that I got to say I'd be really frustrated about, because you mentioned the Miami Heat with their schedule, because, they had all those easy games that are gone. The Pelicans were going to have an easy schedule, and they still got it. So if I'm like the Heat, I'd be like, come on. Now we got to play all these tough games. The Pelicans still get this easy schedule where they're playing Phoenix and Memphis, and that's got to hurt. And then I think one other team, because I'm a Nets fan and I've been watching the schedule for them. They've got a bit of a tough schedule as well. And what's really frustrating probably for them, and it's going to be really unconventional for the average basketball fan, is the start times, because obviously since they're playing in the bubble, I think they're only using 2 or 3 different courts there. Nets have weekday afternoon games. They have 2 weekday afternoon games against the Magic that are at 1:30. So it's going to be weird. It's going to be almost like baseball, seeing an afternoon weekday action in the NBA in August. It's just going to be so weird. But I think the Nets have a good chance. Of course, the East is a little less contested right now. There's only 9 teams going, and it's really just between the Nets, Orlando, and Washington for that final 2 spots. While the West, every Western Conference team is there except for Golden State and the Timberwolves. So this should be interesting to watch. But you did mention one other thing. The Lakers have JR. J.R. Smith is back playing with LeBron James. He thought they were up last time. Hopefully that doesn't happen again, but he is back and will probably see a lot of minutes filling in Avery Bradley's spot. Now they'll have him, Danny Green, and Alex Caruso as their three main guards out there. I mean, he hasn't played much NBA action in quite a while since that infamous incident in the finals against Golden State, LeBron's final appearance with the Cavs in Game 1 at Oracle Arena, and now he is back playing with LeBron James. I mean, how do you see this fit working, and do you think he's going to do a good job filling the role that Avery Bradley had and had done a pretty good job with this year?
I mean, I think J.R. Smith's the best player in the NBA, so it wouldn't surprise me if he fixed things. But, no, J.R., again, he's going to have it in his head of, what happened the last time when he played a basketball game. And I think he's going to turn around here taking an opportunity. Obviously, I think, he'll fill Alex Caruso's role. But it wouldn't surprise me if you see him racking up the minutes, playing a lot of basketball, maybe even being a starter at some point in these next 8 games. Because the only reason why I say that is, again, you got to get him back into game shape. Look what happened to Carmelo Anthony and how that all worked out for Portland. Carmelo obviously came in a response of injuries, but he wasn't expected to be a starter. He turned out to be a starter for them simply because that's just how it worked out. But, I'm not comparing Carmelo to JR. I think Carmelo's a far better basketball player, regardless of Carmelo's history, than J.R. Smith. But, you're looking for JR. This is a huge opportunity because 8 games can make the difference of if he plays in the NBA again after this season, or if he's going back home and, maybe playing, in a different country, or just never playing basketball again. So I think J.R. Smith needs to prove himself, take this seriously, and most importantly, come out and win an NBA title. I still, as a Cavs fan, my team's obviously not there. So there's not going to be a opportunity to see a Cleveland Cavaliers upset 8-1, to win. But if I'm a Lakers fan, first off, do this for Kobe. Go out, win a championship. That's the most important thing. We can't forget that. With all this stuff with going COVID, you almost start to forget how much you feel about the Kobe situation, like to see the Lakers win. And for J.R. Smith, turn around. You have LeBron, who I have no idea after that mistake is still your best friend. So that says a lot about LeBron. But you turn around, try to prove yourself, make a difference. Prove that this Lakers team is something scared of, and prove that you're better than the Clippers, because we still have no idea how this rivalry is going to turn out. And I'm excited to see them in a championship game on the Western Conference side against each other, because I still think that's going to be probably the best series we see, better than the NBA championship. But again, you're the Lakers, J.R. Smith, go out there, prove it, win a championship, come back home, and especially for Cavaliers fans, bring it back home for Cleveland, even though it's going to L.A.
Yeah, it's been a while since LeBron got his last championship, and of course J.R. Smith with that notable incident. But now he's back and getting another chance. One of many guys who have gotten signed himself. Joakim Noah got signed. Tyler Johnson, guys who we didn't really know if we'd see them anymore in the NBA. And listen, if there was no pandemic and this whole restart, this would not have happened. But you talked about how Carmelo Anthony had fit in very well with Portland, getting an opportunity to play when, frankly, we all thought he was done. And Carmelo coming back and fitting in very well with the Blazers. So it's going to be interesting to see. July 30th is the first doubleheader to start the year. The restart, it'll be the Jazz and the Pelicans, and then the Lakers and Clippers squaring off in the nightcap. So last thing for today, NASCAR went racing 3 times yesterday. Trucks, Xfinity, and Cup, all at Pocono Raceway. It was Brandon Jones winning the truck race, Chase Briscoe winning the Xfinity race. Both of those races, numerous contenders, many of the best drivers were taken out in wrecks. It was a day full of crashes on the truck and Xfinity side. Not so much in Cup. Cup was more of a strategy race, and in the end it was Denny Hamlin going to victory lane as he outdueled Kevin Harvick and Brad Keselowski and others. And, I mean, overall, I know people have their opinions about Pocono Raceway, that sometimes the racing isn't the best. I know there were a lot of cautions that kind of broke things up in the truck and Xfinity races, but frankly, with all the strategy, and there was some exciting racing on the Cup side, I don't think it was all that bad.
No, I don't think it was bad either. You know, when you turn around with Pocono, what makes it so unique is, first off, there's no other track with the exception of road courses where you're running 54 seconds a lap. You know, the drivers today, they have it good. Back-to-back doubleheaders, I believe it was combined maybe 240, 250 something laps around Pocono. And yesterday's race, I know it was like 140 laps, if I'm not mistaken, but that's besides the point. Back to the Pocono, you used to run 200 laps per race twice a year to combine for 400 laps. Then they knocked it down to 180 for both races, so that's 360. Well, now they don't even have to race nearly half of that distance. And, you know, the drivers, they have it good because I know I get it. It's a very, very long race. And the one thing about Pocono that always makes it interesting is you're always racing against the weather. You'd think when you're in the mountains, it's totally split up. But the racing yesterday was more weather-oriented, I would say, Eddie, which made it a lot more interesting compared to Saturday's race because we didn't know, will it end to darkness? Well, with all the yellows we saw going on early in the race, will they, change the finishing point? And we saw hard, aggressive racing and different strategies, especially with guys, short pitting right when they got in the fuel window and doing things reversed compared to trying to stay out as long as you can and then take a shorter, like 2-tire pit stop towards the end to, try to get that track position if a scenario is to pop up. So, Pocono has its digs, but it's provided really good racing for both NASCAR and IndyCar. I hate that there's a lot of wrecks still. That's unfortunate because the truck race and especially the Xfinity race where you saw some of the dumbest, and I mean dumbest wrecks you'll ever see, they all took place. I wish those can get fixed a little bit, but it's the tricky triangle for a reason. And it's not just because of the tunnel turn. It's the tricky triangle because this track is also relatively bumpy and not an easy track to deal with.
Yeah, it's very difficult, and you mentioned the wrecks. I mean, it's a pretty dangerous track as well. We've seen that proven time and time again. We saw a lot of wrecks yesterday in Xfinity, not as much in Cup, and there were a couple in Cup, and then a decent amount in trucks. And how about on the first lap, crashes in both trucks and Xfinity? I mean, there were a lot of guys who didn't have any real experience racing at Pocono Raceway in both of those events, and that was really proven early on. But two things I just wanted to address. First off, on the Cup side, I mean, Kyle Busch, I can't believe it. We're coming to 4th of July weekend. He does not have any playoff points so far. Was in the lead yesterday, had contact with Ryan Blaney. That was the end of his day. He was not too happy about that. His teammates, Hamlin and Truex, they've gotten to victory lane this year. I mean, I'm not counting out Kyle Busch at all because, he's talented. And think about it. He still won his championship back in 2015 when he missed most of the first half of the year with that leg injury and was still able to come back and go on a tear. And he's still got, we're coming up to a lot of tracks that are really good Kyle Busch racetracks coming up in the next few weeks. And we start with Indianapolis coming this weekend, where he's been one of the best drivers over the past few years at the Brickyard. But it's going to be interesting to see what Kyle Busch can do. I saw something how 15 different drivers have earned a playoff point this year, including the likes of Eric Almirola, Ricky Stenhouse, Tyler Reddick, and Kyle Busch is still not one of those drivers. I mean, he's due and he's hungry, and it's not like he's fallen off. We know he has speed. He's been very competitive, and we've seen him in the Xfinity and truck races continuing to dominate just like he always does. So that'll be interesting to see. Second thing was the Xfinity race. You talked about some of the dumbest wrecks you've seen. And that weird incident with Justin Haley and Riley Herbst on the front stretch where Justin Haley kind of, I don't know what happened there, but he kind of turned Riley Herbst around. And then NASCAR did something that I haven't really seen NASCAR do, really take a stand where they stopped Haley on pit road for 2 laps for aggressive driving, and he was never able to get back into it. So first thing, what do you make of Kyle Busch this season? And second, what do you make of the NASCAR officials' decision in that Xfinity race?
Well, the first thing about Kyle Busch's situation, and to be honest, Eddie, it doesn't surprise me right now. Why do you think Kyle turned around and said, okay, I want to race the trucks and Xfinity right away? It's not because he wants to just go out and win and break history. It's because Kyle Busch needs track time to be good. And unfortunately, without practices, Kyle Busch can't make the adjustments to make himself a godly race car. And practicing is huge. It's always been huge about Kyle Busch's career. And he's facing a struggle right now. And to be honest, I know this sounds terrible for Kyle, not to be an anti-hater Kyle Busch fan, but I'm liking the product NASCAR has right now without practice. I would like to see them not have practice, as weird as that sounds, going to tracks. Now, if you go to a track that's brand new, for example, the Indianapolis road course, okay, practice, please. I don't need to see the Roval situation. Remember how everyone was scared to go to the Roval because we thought we would finish with 2 race cars? I personally was against the Roval the first year, and it turned out to be an excellent finish, obviously, but I didn't think we were going to see – I thought we'd see more race cars finishing a Talladega race than we would see at the Roval. But overall, have practice for those tracks. But for this year, I hope they don't have practice, and I hope for a long time they don't do practice. Just go out there. You've got what you got. Kyle's going to have to learn to adapt to that because he hasn't had it in a long time. He's been a big repetition practice guy to get his car better and get back into the rhythm. And that's not saying Kyle Busch hasn't been good. He's been a top five guy all year long. But without that practice, it hasn't gotten him to that big 3 status in which he was for the past now, 6, 7, 8 years. So Kyle has to adapt. He just has to, and they have to hit something while they're at the shop before race day for him to be consistent. You mentioned Indianapolis. I think it's going to be a good track for him, but I don't see him winning at Indianapolis. I still think he has to learn, and you saw from yesterday as well. He was a lot better second day at Pocono than he was the first day as well, but unfortunately he broke loose, got the incident, and went headfirst into the inside wall. So, that kind of happened. I mean, I shouldn't say he broke loose. He had a little bit of help. But, it's still in regards to that, he's got to learn. And he's a veteran. He's known his system for a long time. But he will get better. Kyle Busch will win. I don't know when, but he will win at some point this season. And if it's the chase, so be it. Wins the chase, locks himself into the next round. That's critical too. But he'll find it eventually. Now, you mentioned the Riley Hurst situation. Very surprising NASCAR took a stand. Because if that was anyone else, and I agree with NASCAR fans on this, if Kyle Busch did that, if Jimmy Johnson did that, or if anyone else, a top tier, Justin Allgaier, did that, I don't think there's a parking. I really don't think there's a parking. It's a really weird situation with Haley. I get there may have been some things going on there for the past few laps or whatever that led to that dumping situation. But, I don't really know what else you do if you're NASCAR because I get, yes, they're at fast speeds and you're intentionally dumping someone, but it's not like he dumped other cars. He sent them to the inside wall. And, yes, I guess what could have, should have, what could have happened, I guess, is a threat. But what happened to boys have at it? That's what I want to know. What happened to boys have that? I know you don't want to junk race cars, but you can't let guys settle it themselves. I mean, if you're going to say that's bad, and I'm a big Alex Bowman fan, but tell me that you're not going to punish Alex Bowman for spinning someone of Bubba Wallace door first into the outside wall at the Roval. And I get they're at much lower speeds, but it's the same threat. So if you're going to park someone for 2 laps for doing that, you have to hold the same standard to everyone else.
Yeah, and I feel like it's just I'd feel bad if I was Justin Haley because this is not the first time that, officiating or just the NASCAR system, he's not a bad guy, and he's a young kid, and he's very talented, but really not getting the recognition he deserves. Of course, this penalty, a couple of years ago in the July Daytona race in the Xfinity Series, the controversial finish where it looked like he won, but he ended up being called for crossing below the yellow. And even his Cup win, regardless of what you'll say about that, nobody wants to talk about that Daytona race last year because people think that was the most illegitimate winner we've maybe ever seen in the Cup Series when he got that victory for Spire Motorsports. But really,
Kurt Busch, I still believe, should have won that race.
Yeah, I'm not saying that Justin Haley should have won that race, but what I am saying is just that he does not get a lot of credit, and he does not. I don't know. It's a weird situation. I think he's a very talented driver. I think he's going to find his way into the Cup Series at some point. I also think Kalegi Racing could find themselves as a Cup team at some point because they've gained a lot of resources. They have gone from being a middle-of-the-road car with Blake Cook a few years ago in the Xfinity Series to suddenly being this competitive team that can field 3 fast cars when A.J. Allmendinger's there as well and be competitive not just at the plate tracks too, showing speed yesterday at Pocono, the Dinger one at Atlanta, I believe. So, I mean, they're a really strong team, and I think we saw them field a Cup car in the Daytona 500 with Justin Haley, and I'm very intrigued to see how this team continues to grow. They're a small team. They don't have tons of sponsors. It's not any big Fortune 500 companies that are sponsoring them, but nonetheless, they're doing a heck of a job really starting to grow. But that's going to just about wrap things up today. Fun discussion. And on Thursday, I think since we talked about the AFC today, we'll leave with the NFC on Thursday. Of course, Tom Brady moving to Tampa Bay, the Green Bay situation, Dak and the Cowboys. There's a lot to talk about there. So we'll get into that and preview the upcoming weekend in sports on Thursday. Until then, I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
We'll see you next time. This is Sports Speak.